What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another video. It is finally time to install an actual lift kit on the Jeep Gladiator. So for those of you that have followed the channel for a while, you've known that we started off with the 1.5-inch TerraFlex leveling kit up front. Wheeled with that for a while, then we installed the 2-inch Iron Rock Off-Road Spacer lift. That's done great too, but it's time to actually install a real lift kit. So in this video, I'm gonna show you what we've went with. If you watched the last video, this is actually already installed. I talked about why I went with this kit, all the specifics of this kit, but this video we're mostly focusing on the install of the actual lift kit. We're gonna do it right here in my driveway. Hopefully we'll either finish it today or today and tomorrow. Be doing this all alone with basic tools, and I'm gonna show you exactly how to do it. It's gonna be a really easy project, but let's check out the kit. This is the Clayton Offroad 3.5-inch Overland Plus kit. It comes with all 8 adjustable control arms, front and rear track bars, coil springs, sway bar links, bump stops, all of the good stuff. Now this kit does let you choose your own shocks. I went with the Fox shocks. We're gonna see how they work. It's a kind of like middle of the road shock, not too expensive, not too cheap. I'm excited to see how they ride. We might change them out in the future, but for now they're gonna work perfect with this lift. So that is enough talking. Let's pull the Jeep around, get it in the carport, and get this lift kit on. So if you've never installed a lift kit before, it's really not that difficult. You can do it at home. All you need is a jack, some jack stands, and of course, just your basic tool set. Wrenches, sockets, ratchets, all that stuff. It's gonna be really easy. So this video, it might not be exactly step by step, but I'm gonna show you all the important stuff so you can figure it out for yourself. First thing we're gonna do is grab a jack and jack stands. We're gonna jack up the Jeep from the front axle, put the jack stands underneath both sides of the frame, and then take our wheels and tires off. So once we've removed the wheels and tires, we're gonna jack the axle up a little bit with our jack. We're gonna remove the shock absorbers on the axle, as well as our sway bar end links. So right now you're probably wondering, Ben, none of this is stock. What are you talking about? The same steps will apply to a stock Jeep, or if you've already added a few components, it's gonna be the exact same. As you can tell, I am running the 2-inch Iron Rock Off-Road Spacer lift, the Falcon shocks, and the core control arms. All of this is gonna get changed and replaced with the full suspension lift. With the shocks and sway bar removed, we can now lower our axle as far down as it'll go before our brake lines start getting tight. Before you lower your axle all the way down, make sure that everything has plenty of room. As you can tell, I've already removed my control arm brake mounting point right there, and all of these other hoses and lines. Unplug them or disconnect the little quick disconnect fittings, just so there's plenty of room for our axle to droop down. As you can tell, we now have plenty of room to remove our spring without a spring compressor. So now we're gonna go ahead and pull our spring and shock all the way out. We can now install our new shocks. Now I went with the Fox Performance Series. The front are for a JL, the rear are for the JT. The rear valve a little different. This is supposed to be a pretty good shock. It's very similar to what comes in the Mopar kit, except it's a lot longer. So the front has close to 11-inch travel and the rear has close to 12-inch travel. I'll throw the link to these in the video description so you can check them out. They're not too expensive, around $150 a piece. Got them from Off-Road Elements. Call up Jill, she'll give you a good deal. That kind of rhymed. But I'm excited to see how these work. We'll do a review on them, and you know, if they're not that impressive, we'll change them out in the future. So we now have our new shock on and no springs at all. Before we go ahead and reinstall our spring, if the kit came with bump stops, what these are gonna do is limit our up travel. So it's gonna attach right here onto the axle, and during our up travel, it's gonna contact our upper bump stop pad. These do require you to drill out this little coil perch on the axle itself. I've already done that. The TerraFlex leveling kit required a 1.5-inch bump stop, so mine is drilled out. I think it's around a 1/2-inch bolt. It's pretty easy. You're just gonna drill a hole straight through. Now we're not gonna install this yet because it's gonna make it really hard to install our coil spring over it. So what we're gonna do is kind of hold this inside of our coil spring while we position it here. Now one thing's really important to note, if for some reason your isolator falls out, make sure these 2 tabs on the back right there are indexed up through the frame. So let's get our coil spring on and tighten down our bump stop. We're now gonna go ahead and attach our shock at the axle side. We're gonna jack up the axle so we can slide our bolt through there, tighten it down, and tighten the upper bolt as well. All right, let's go ahead and jack it up till we're off the jack stands. It's gonna put us at our ride height. What we have to do next is start working on our sway bar links. since we're lifting the suspension up a few inches, we have to replace our sway bar end links. If we were just to go ahead and tighten these back down, you would be able to see that our sway bar would be at a horrible angle. We really want this sway bar to be at least parallel, maybe angling up a little bit. So what I'm gonna do, oh man, this is stiff. We're gonna pull it up to the angle we want, which is right about there, slowly going up. We're gonna measure the distance between this top joint and the mount on the axle, and that's right around 9.5 inches. The Clayton Offroad kit comes with a threaded rod and 2 rod ends. Now, as they ship it, they send us with a bunch of extra length. That is way too much. So what we're gonna have to do is cut this rod to the correct length. So let's go over in the garage and I'll show you how to cut this, knowing that we need to make them at least 9.5 inches from eye to eye. We have to space both of our rod ends from eye to eye to our measured length, which is right around 9.5. Now we're gonna go ahead and thread these nuts on our sway bar, the actual threaded rod, because we are gonna have to cut this. And if you don't have a perfect cut, as long as you have the nut on there and you thread it off, it's gonna fix that cut threaded end. So what we're gonna do, now that we know this is 9.5, is set this up. We're gonna bring these nuts in a little bit deeper. And I'm gonna put a mark right here on the sway bar link, right around halfway where our cut is gonna be. So this is about halfway through the threaded distance in here. So in the future, we can still make them longer or we can make them shorter. We're gonna grab either a Sawzall or a grinder and cut where we just marked. So we're now gonna go ahead and unthread these nuts. And what that's gonna do is kind of fix the threads on the way out. Should be pretty easy to remove. Let's go ahead and thread these back on. Put a little bit of anti-seize on the ends, and then rethread our joint back on. The driver's side is complete with the springs, the shocks, and the sway bar end links. We are gonna change out our lower control arms and track bar, but first I wanna get both sides just like this with the shock springs and sway bar links. So I'm gonna go ahead and lower this down, do the exact same steps over on the other side, and then we'll start working with some of the adjustable components on the axle. That's where it kind of starts to get tricky, but it's not very hard at all. So let's go ahead and do the exact same steps over on the other side. One thing I do want to mention, for the passenger side, in order for this axle to drop down low enough, we are gonna have to remove, or at least loosen, our track bar bolt right here on the axle side. 21 millimeter, let's go ahead and break it free. We're now gonna go ahead and remove the track bar bolt from the frame side and remove our track bar completely. This is something we're gonna have to play around with, but we're gonna set up our Clayton track bar just a little bit longer than the factory one. Once we have the wheels and tires back on, we can fine tune it to really center the axle from side to side. So here we have the factory track bar and the Clayton Offroad adjustable track bar. It's adjustable down here at this end by loosening this nut and threading this rod end, which looks like a Curry Johnny joint, either out or in. Now, I'm gonna take a measurement on the stock one, and it looks like it's 33 3/4. This one's at 34 inches from eye to eye. So it's a 1/4 inch longer, which might be what we need. So I'm gonna go ahead and run with this length. We're gonna throw this in, tighten it up, and then later on, we'll double check and make sure the axle's centered. Sometimes it can be a little difficult getting the track bar aligned with the hole in the axle. You don't want to just adjust that out so it lines up, because you gotta think, right now, our suspension's unloaded. When it raises up, the axle's gonna shift that way. So what I'm gonna do is use the jack and kind of slowly jack up the axle till those holes align, put the bolt in, and get it snug for now. So this is as close as I can get it for now. What we're gonna do is wait until the tires and wheels are back on the Jeep. We can turn the steering wheel a little bit until this lines up in the hole and slide the bolt through. It actually looks like the track bar bolt might line up perfectly now. Yeah, just setting the Jeep on the ground did it. We will have to remember to come back later and tighten down all the jam nuts. Right now, this is the first jam nut we're dealing with, but all of the control arms are gonna have jam nuts on them. Don't wanna forget to tighten those. The front is installed and it looks really, really nice. It is gonna settle just a little bit once we actually drive around and the springs kind of break in, but right now it looks really, really nice. So normally the next step would be to attach our control arms up front, but I'm gonna save that towards the end of the video. I will also say that I'm not gonna go too far in depth on, adjusting your control arms and everything, at least in this video, because I've already made a video talking about how to install control arms and adjust them. But we are gonna install these last, so we're gonna spin the Jeep around and start working on getting the rear installed. Now that we're working on the rear, we definitely wanna make sure that we are chalking the front tires. Since we're lifting the back end, there's nothing stopping it from rolling forward. So we're gonna start off by doing the exact same thing that we did on the front. We're gonna jack it up, put jack stands under the frame, take the wheels and tires off, take our shocks and sway bar links off, and drop the axle. And I hear rain. Hopefully the carport keeps us dry, but the rear should just be as easy as the front. There's really not too much to it. And I wanna show you guys how the 37 fits under here. I just wanna go ahead and do that. So a lot of people online are saying that 37 fits under there, and while it does fit, it's not a good fit at all. Let me show you. So it's actually aired down quite a bit right now, and as you can tell, it hits our rear receiver, so it's squished all the way back as far as it can go. And then if we look up here, as you can tell, it is hitting the track bar. So it is sandwiched really, really tight up here. It does not really affect anything by hitting the track bar, but it's really, really annoying when you go over big bumps. You can hear this squeak from the metal rubbing on the tire. So I don't really know what I'm gonna do yet. I might find a used 37 that's a little bit smaller so it fits up in here, but we will see. My theory is that, the people that say their 37 fits, maybe they have like a small size 37. A lot of manufacturers say they're 37, but the actual tire size is maybe 36 and a half or even less than that, and sure, that might give you the clearance so it's not hitting, but mine is rubbing pretty bad. But yes, it does fit, it does work. I've had a lot of questions about that, so let's get this lift kit installed. The factory springs are out, and it's time to take a look at the Clayton Offroad rear coil spring. So the fronts we installed were just the standard spring, very close to the stock spring rate, probably a little bit higher. They're standard coils, they aren't triple rate, dual rate, none of that. From what I was told from Clayton, there's, very similar to, the factory ride while still giving us that off-road performance. Now the rear, they did go with a triple rate design, just because that's almost what the factory has. A triple rate spring is really gonna help in the rear of this truck, so when it's unloaded, loaded, and when we're carrying a bunch of weight, that's when those variable spring rates are really gonna help. But you can tell a huge difference between this spring and the factory spring. It's taller, and this thing is just massive. One thing I will recommend is to remove this brake line bracket right there. Take that little 10mm bolt off. That way you have plenty of room for your brake lines to drop the axle all the way down. But project's going good. Let's get these springs up in there. These rear springs are extremely stiff. They're truck springs, so getting them in there was not easy at all. Definitely takes a lot of muscle. I would recommend 2 people, somebody pushing down the axle while you're under there trying to get the spring in. But they are in, so we're gonna start taking a look at the rear track bar. Just like the front, we are gonna measure from eye to eye of our stock one and set our aftermarket track bar a little bit longer. The rear end's sitting on its own weight, so it's time to figure out about the rear sway bar links. Now, the good news is that the rear, I don't think we're gonna have to trim. What's gonna happen is this rod end, it's gonna go up here, right where that factory hole is. And as you can tell down there, that's a perfect length. So I'm gonna duplicate the other one just like this, get them installed. Now for the rear at the frame side, we are gonna be reusing the original bolt. Include 4 different little metal spacers. And what that's gonna do is let this heim joint, flex during the misalignment, since we're not ever gonna disconnect our rear sway bar. So put one on the outside, one on the inside. All right, guys, so we have the wheels and tires back on, springs, shocks, and sway bar links. We're gonna start off doing the rear control arms here. So the first thing I did was pulled off one of the factory lower control arms on the rear. What we're gonna do, once again, is measure from eye to eye and get that measurement. In my case, it was 23 3/4. So we grabbed our new adjustable control arm. We're gonna bring this one out maybe to 24 inches or 23 7/8. We don't wanna go too far out because that's gonna push the axle back. Now I was looking at this and the axle and wheel is still pretty much perfectly centered in the wheel well. We could push it back just a hair to account for the lift kind of sucking the axle up towards the front of the Jeep. And then we'll use our upper control arm to dial in our rear pinion angle. I'm gonna adjust mine to 24 inches on both sides. So we'll sit here on the bench, measure them out 24 inches, do the driver's side first, replace that, and then come over here to the passenger side, remove that control arm, and then reinstall our new one. I like doing one control arm at a time. That way the axle isn't swinging around, falling all over the place, and it just makes it so much easier to make sure you're doing it correctly. We're now gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the passenger side. We're leaving all the hardware loose until we install all 4 control arms. All right, brought out the better light so we can highlight the rest of this install. It's time to focus on our upper control arms. The uppers are what are gonna affect this pinion angle right here. We want our pinion angle coming off the axle to match the angle of our drive shaft. So what we have to do is raise this up, which means our uppers are going to be extended a lot longer than the factory length, or at least as much as we need to have a good pinion angle. We have one completely removed. We're now going to put our jack on the pinion and loosen the other side or remove it completely. We can lift up on the jack until we have a pinion angle that we're happy with. So as you can tell, our pinion angle definitely increased. I'm going to lower it down a little bit because it's almost better to have it just a hair under. That way under acceleration, it has plenty of room to lift up. So we're gonna set it so it looks just like that. What I'm gonna do is go grab the measuring tape and measure from eye to eye in the mounting spots, mock up the upper control arm, and then install it here. Do the exact same thing on the other side. We're gonna go ahead and torque everything down, tighten these jam nuts, and I'm probably gonna call it a night. So we made a ton of progress yesterday and last night on the lift. I think we have maybe 5 or 6 hours into the project, and all we have left to do is the front control arm. So we're gonna be doing that, and I'm also gonna show you how to recenter your steering wheel. So once we lift the Jeep, our alignment, mostly the steering wheel, it's gonna be way kind of like cockeyed. We are gonna have to fix that before we go for a ride. But next thing we're gonna do is replace the front control arms. It's gonna be the same procedure as the rear. We're gonna take off one front lower, adjust our new ones out a little bit longer, and then we're gonna dial in our pinion angle and caster with the upper control arm. So I've already done a video on this, and it's gonna be it's the same procedure for the rear. The only thing that's different about the front is that we do have to worry about pinion angle and caster. Caster is the angle at what our ball joints are. So you can kind of see right there, see how the upper ball joint and lower ball joint, if you drew a line through them, it kind of leans back. That's a big part of how the Jeep drives and handles. So we want to make sure that we still have a good caster angle while still having a good pinion angle at the same time. So if you are curious about that, I've already done multiple videos on caster and pinion angles. Definitely go check that out, or just, set it to a manufacturer recommended length. So that is enough talking. Let's go finish off this lift. But man, it is looking really, really good. The front is going to settle a little bit just because it's a standard rate spring. It's not a triple rate. It's not a dual rate. It is a standard rate. So probably, I'll drive around 100 miles. You'll see that it'll settle maybe an inch to half an inch. Let's get this job done. All right, so here's a few small differences I want to show you guys while we have the core 4x4 control arms and the Clayton Offroad control arms side by side. The core control arms are very, very good. I'd still highly recommend them, but the Clayton Offroad arms are a little more designed for the JL and JT. Like I mentioned before, you see all that ribbing just like the factory ones. The Core 4x4 ones do not have that. Also, this whole surface area of where that metal bushing is a lot bigger. So we get a little more clamping force inside the bracket, and I think over time it's gonna prevent this control arm from getting loose or moving and ovaling out that bracket. And then of course we have the square tubing versus the DOM round tubing. So this looks a lot beefier. As for weight, I'd say they're very, very similar. There's really no big difference. So what we're gonna do, measure eye to eye and set this one just a little bit longer since we went up in lift height. We are pretty much all done. Everything's torqued down, everything's installed. The last thing we have to do is either take the Jeep to an alignment shop or at least straighten the steering wheel here at home. I'd recommend at least straighten the steering wheel, because if you're driving to an alignment shop, let me show you how far off the steering wheel is. So right now, this is the steering wheel with the tires perfectly straight. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you how to get this pretty close. This can almost be like a trial and error thing. Like right now, with the tires straight, I could get it leveled and go drive on the road and realize it's still off a little bit, but you could just do this multiple times and eventually you will get that steering wheel perfectly straight. It's really, really easy to do. We're gonna hop up under here and find our drag link. Right here, this bar that goes from the axle up here to our steering box. There's a 15mm nut. We're gonna go ahead and loosen that. And once that's loose, we have this little turnbuckle here. What we're gonna do is try to make this a little bit longer. So I am rotating it, and I can tell that our pitman arm is moving. So let's go ahead and hop up here and see if the steering wheel moved. It's a lot easier if you have two people. So it moved a little bit. We have a lot more way to go. Looking pretty good. I think we'll call that good for now, and then, you know, fine tune it later. Once we're driving down the road, I'll bring a 15mm with me and then make adjustments on the side of the road as needed. So we're gonna go ahead and tighten down that 15mm nut, and this job is complete. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully you can tell that installing a lift kit in your driveway is not the hardest thing. You know, granted, this is probably my, 30th lift kit I've ever installed, maybe more. So I kind of have it down packed. It's really, really simple, especially if you have 2 or 3 other people with you giving you a hand. Of course, power tools are gonna help, but it's a very easy project and you save a lot of money by doing it yourself. And most of these steps are the same for every Jeep, JK, LJ, TJ, all that stuff. Not that kind of Jeep though. Nope, not those. So back to what we were talking about. I've actually been driving around with the Jeep with the lift kit on for about 3 days now. And let me tell you, this thing drives amazing, better than stock, but we're gonna do a standalone video review. We still have to take this thing off-road, show you guys how it handles on the road, how it drives at high speed. And I'm excited to see how it does off-road. We have not wheeled it yet, but I'm curious to see how this thing flexes, how it handles, at some higher speed off-road stuff. And we'll make a cool video about that. So stay tuned for that. Next up, we have a lot of other projects. We have to get the rooftop tint on and some other goodies for both this, the JK, and the LJ. There's a small hint. Pretty much all of the same products or same items are going on all 3 Jeeps, and they might put out some bright light. So stay tuned for that video and a lot of others. The weather's warming up, so we're gonna hopefully make some more wheeling trips soon. And Cassie is almost done with her busy season at work, so she'll be in more videos. We'll be able to go out and have some more fun, so I'm excited to start sharing those trips with you. Thanks for watching, guys. Like always, if you have any questions about Jeeps in general, or putting on a lift kit or any other suspension component, let me know in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to help you guys out. So until next time, I'll see you later. Oh, and one last thing. After a few hundred miles, make sure you go back and re-torque and check all your butts. Make sure you check all your nuts and bolts and make sure everything's re-torqued and still tight. See you later.